Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope everyone's doing well. I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about something, to speak about something that I find it to be very salient during this time that we're living in, especially with all of the political upheaval, the racial turmoil, the protests, and all of these things that are going on. I wanted to speak on a different lens or a different lens of filter when we look at these different issues and how they connect to societal progress, especially for African Americans and even for the Muslims. It's called interest convergence. Now, interest convergence is something that's taught within all of the social sciences across the board. The founder, I think it's important that you understand or that you know something about the founder of interest convergence. His name is Derek Bell. Derek Bell is an African American lawyer, professor, civil rights activist. In 1971, he became the very first African American professor of law at Harvard Law School. He is often credited as one of the founders of critical race theory, along with Richard Delgado, Charles Lawrence, Mari Masuta, and Patricia Williams. Professor Bell, he was also a visiting professor at New York University School of Law until his death, from 1991 until his death. He was also the dean of the University of Oregon Law School. So he was an academic heavy hitter. When we look at progress for the African American community, if you ask, I think, the average person, have African Americans made progress? You would absolutely get the answer yes. I think from African Americans and from Caucasians, white Americans in this country. We have to ask ourselves, what does progress look like? What is actual progress? I want to read to you a quote from Derek Bell. He says, "It appears that my worst fears have been realized. We have made progress in everything, yet nothing has changed." I'll read it one more time. "It appears that my worst fears have been realized. We have made progress in everything, yet nothing has changed." If you take that quote and you couple it with, say, The New Jim Crow, the book by Michelle Alexander, where she documents structural racism, structural oppression from the time of slavery to now. And she explains and shows how structural oppression and structural racism has not been eradicated, but it simply changes and morphs to be current with whatever the current situation is. So again, the question about actual progress, have we made progress as African Americans in this country? So for the minority group in America, or any other country really, we have to understand that interest convergence is it's a dynamic. It's those who have power and those who don't. Those who have power never really want to give up or capitulate to any degree. They don't want to give up power, wealth, access to resources, any of that. It isn't until something happens that causes the interests of the power, those in positional power, and those who don't have power, their interests to cross. Normally, progress is made because, again, when the interests cross, there's something of benefit for those in positional power. They gain something. They benefit from it in some way, shape, fashion, or form. The whatever they give to those who have less, from a societal perspective, it's not given out of altruism. It's given out of benefit. They get something out of it. Now, understand, the point of that interest convergence doesn't last forever. It very well could cease to exist. And at that point, the progress, or the seeming, the ostensible progress that was made, could then be taken away. So it's not something that once you have it, you have it. You have it for that amount of time that the interests converge. Once that interest convergence is not there, then the need for those in positional power to continue to give you that ceases to exist. And they normally will find ways to lessen it, or to not give it at all, if they can get away with it. So when we look at marginalized communities, we ask, what does the dynamic of interest convergence look like? What do those who don't have, what do they want? They want access to opportunity, real access to opportunities, to jobs, to education, healthcare, quality healthcare, clean, healthy food, all of these things. They want equal treatment under the law. Now, we know that even if we go back as recently as Wednesday, when the Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building, all right? One woman got shot. One. And I think that most of us know, had that been African Americans storming the building, or immigrants from wherever storming the building by the thousands, it would have been a massacre. It would have been a slaughter. So, equal treatment under the law. Self-determination and physical safety. We want to be safe in our communities and not be brutalized by over or hyper militarized police departments. We want a voice in determining and directing systems in our communities. And this is something that any community that has any level of control of their destiny, they have these things. They have a voice in determining and directing systems. And later on, I'm going to sort of cover what gives you that voice in determining and directing systems within, your community and between you and those in positional power. Now, for the people that are in power, the dominant power structure, they want to alleviate financial pressure. If something has been boycotted, if you remember the Montgomery bus boycott, that lasted 81 days or something like this. It wasn't until the money was being disrupted did they want to come to the table and talk and give the people of that era some semblance of humanity. It wasn't until the money got disrupted. Now, this is something else that's very important. That money was disrupted because there was a coalescence. There was a unity. There was a social efficacy amongst African Americans at that time that really doesn't exist, at the level that it existed back in the day. Because there was that solidarity in vision and solidarity in mission, they were able to, again, create an interest convergence. They wanted to ride the bus. They wanted to sit where they wanted. They wanted to not be discriminated against. So they boycotted. They stopped riding the bus as a collective, which affected the money. The dominant power structure, interest convergence, what they get from it, they get status, reputation, and their image is at stake. Now, we're living in a time, in an era where your image and your reputation is almost everything, right? If you have a good reputation and a good image for the world or for the society, people will come to your business. They'll patronize you. They'll do business. But if you had bad status, bad reputation, you're going to get boycotted. Again, it comes down to capitalism and money. It's going to affect the money. And increased access, opportunity, and power. This is what the dominant power structure wants. That's what they want to maintain. That's what they want to gain from any type of interest convergence. Now, back in the 1960s, I forget the name of the coach, but it was a basketball team down in Texas. And the coach broke away from the norm. Basketball teams back during that time were primarily white, and they would have, one or two black players on a team. Well, this coach, he stepped outside of the norm and he recruited many black players. Now, during the course of the season, the players, the black players, the white players, the coaches, they were really catching a bad time from the community, from the society. I mean, we're talking in the 60s, so, you could imagine what they were getting, because other teams, again, one or two black players who didn't really play, and the game of basketball was primarily a white man's sport. This particular coach recruited many black players. Now, he played them mixed, black and white. He played them together. This team made it all the way to the championship. And this coach sat all of the white players and he strictly played the black players. And they won. They won the championship. Other schools after that followed suit and began to recruit black players for the sole purpose of being able to compete and to win championships. Interest convergence. Now, again, let's be mindful that these schools, these universities of higher education did not recruit these black players, again, out of altruism, out of we want to extend to these African Americans the best education that our society has to offer. No, they offered them the opportunity to come and play basketball in order for the school or university to win championships, which again brings in money. So it boils down to money. Another example of, or a more modern example of interest convergence. Well, let me take it back even further first. When we look at the civil rights movement and the difference between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, right? You had Martin Luther King, who was almost a pacifist, turned the other cheek. He allowed dogs to be sicked on, the people who marched with him and beat by the police and spit on and all of that stuff. You had that approach to social justice. And then you had Malcolm X, who basically, I am as nonviolent as you are. If you put your hands on me, I'm going to put my hands on you. There are no freebies here. Now, the dominant power structure, they had to deal with the African American community. And remember, there was a solidarity amongst African Americans at that time. There was a solidarity, there was a social efficacy, there was a love, concern, and caring for each other that is almost non-existent in comparison to what it was then. It's almost non-existent now compared to what it was then. But you had those two dynamics in play. So the power structure had to deal with the African American situation. They had to deal with African American people, black folks. They had to deal with them because civil rights, because of boycotting, because of riots and protests and, Black Panthers and all of these things. All of these things were in full swing. So they had to make a choice. Which of these two is more advantageous to us? Which one between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X would be better for us to deal with, easier for us to deal with, more beneficial for us to deal with? And of course they chose Martin Luther King. So they elevate Martin Luther King. I have a dream, make him the poster child for civil rights, almost, pushing Malcolm X into obscurity, making him, as far as, when you look at history books within public schools, I mean, he's almost persona non grata, like he's almost not even spoken about, non-existent. Everything is about Martin Luther King, nonviolent, basically letting the law enforcement do what they wanted to do to him, peaceful protest for those that are into that. But again, that's an example of interest convergence. A more recent example of interest convergence would be the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor situation, right? All of us in the African American community, we know police abuse has been going on. This isn't new information for us. We know that there's judicial disparities. How sentencing is different between blacks and whites who do similar crimes. We understand that African American and low income neighborhoods are policed different. Statistics and studies show that white Americans do drugs and sell drugs at a higher rate than African Americans. Now keep in mind, there's more of them than us, but nonetheless, African Americans make up 13% approximately of the population of the United States, but we make up 40 to 50%, last time I checked, of the penal system. 13% of the population, but we make up almost half of the prison population. But the statistics show that whites do drugs at a higher rate, a slightly higher rate than African Americans. So something is not right. George Floyd is killed, murdered by the police on tape. All of a sudden, you have protests in the street. You have destruction. You have injury. You have, the citizens in the society all over the country fighting the police. Interest convergence. They have to do something to appease the people, or everything's going to burn to the ground. Now, they knew that the police were doing what they were doing. It wasn't a mystery to them. They knew it. They've been told. I'm talking about the powers that be. They knew. And I think the average person, to some extent, knew that these things were going on. But it wasn't until George Floyd was seen murdered on video and the people rose up, they began to protest, they began to fight, they began to destroy, that the power structure said, okay, what do we need to do to make this stop? Interest convergence. Now we have President-elect Joe Biden talking about police reform, talking about criminal justice reform. It's talking about, letting inmates for low-level drug offenses out of prison. Things like this. Now these things are coming to the forefront. Now these things are coming, up in the conversation because of what the people did. The people caused or forced the hands of the dominant power structure. Now, in reference to African Americans, we have been fed this idea that voting is the be-all end-all. We have been told that there is no change without voting. And I disagree with that. And I disagree with that. Why? because I understand that this society is based on capitalism. If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. Living in a capitalist society, you come to the reality that everything revolves around money. You have other minority or other ethnic groups that are smaller than the African American demographic or population, but yet they have more political power. They hold more, or they wield more influence with the politicians and with the powers that be. Why is that? It's because their money moves different. They have a collective focus with their money more so than African Americans. I watched a TED Talk by a woman who was explaining the length of time that money, a dollar, stays in certain communities. She said that based on studies, that a dollar circulates for 28 days within the Asian community before it goes out, and then other groups get to benefit from it. 28 days. She said that within the Jewish community, a dollar will circulate for 2 weeks amongst the Jews, retailers, banks, each other. That money is circulating. They're benefiting from it. 2 weeks. She said African American dollar circulates within the African American community before it goes outside and others benefit from it for 6 hours. 6 hours. African Americans largely are consumers and not producers. We make up a large chunk of the economy of America. We have economic power if we used it properly. Economics is the key to changing our situation. Again, from a dunya perspective, from a worldly perspective, for those that, from a worldly perspective. Economics is what calls the attention of the people who have power. When these other ethnic groups need to have something done, they have the collective money, collective focus economically to go to a politician and say, look, this is what we want. And they have the money to fund that politician. Politicians love money, to fund that politician or to fund or to do that. They have the collective. But if your money is disenfranchised, separated, and you're just out buying, being a consumer versus being a producer, then after they have come into your communities and solicited and got you to buy into their promises of changing things and getting you to vote for them, after they get your vote, there's really nothing that's pushing them to continue to deal with you. They've already gotten what they wanted. Other ethnicities or other ethnic groups, then after they've given you the vote, they have the economic power amongst themselves to hold you accountable. And this is what African Americans need to get into their head. Voting is not the be all end all, but it is or can be part and parcel. It can be a tool that's used in order to move the group forward. But it's not just economics, or not just voting rather. You have to have that economic key with it. Without that economic key, it's a wrap. They're going to come like they do every 4 years, get your vote, and be out. They got what they wanted. They'll see you in 4 years. We must get our money together. There has to be some coalescence amongst ourselves, some solidarity, some unity economically. We have to get that economic piece together collectively in order for us to be taken seriously and for us to be a force to be reckoned with from a societal perspective. Now, this obviously has cross applications to the Muslims, because many of the issues that exist specifically in the African American community, exist in the African American Muslim community as well, right? There's a hierarchy in society. There's a hierarchy amongst the Muslims, depending upon the community that you're in. I'm not saying something that we don't know. We know the hierarchy from the Arabs and the Pakistan, or the people from the subcontinent, everyone else, and then African Americans at the bottom. And even that, a lot of that revolves around economics. Say it doesn't. Say that hierarchy is not based upon level of education. Tell me it's not based on societal status. Tell me it's not based on economics. Tell me it's not based on who has the money to come out of their pocket to fund the masjid. Tell me that those things are all not factored into the hierarchy that exists in many masajid throughout America. That's not the way it's supposed to be, but that's what capitalism breeds. And we as African Americans have to come to the realization that we have to get our money together. Now, we're talking from a dunya or from a worldly perspective, because first and foremost, we have to get our spirituality together. We have to know who our creator is. We have to have a connection to that creator, and having a connection to that creator then molds our moral base. We have a proverbial line in the sand for things that we will do and won't do. Therefore, or thereby gaining the pleasure of the creator, and thereby the creator then blessing us as a collective with progress, real progress, real progress. Right now, I'm just speaking in reference to the dunya aspect of progress. That's not the most important progress, but that's just the progress that I'm addressing right now. There's a whole different progress that is more important, that must be made by each and every person if they want the outcome in the end that they want. For those of us who are theists, we believe in the creator. We believe in heaven and hell. We believe in a day of judgment. We'll leave that for another day. Right now, we're talking about this world and how we as African Americans and how we as African American Muslims, what we need to focus on. Interest convergence. When you start getting your money right, and there's a collective focus with that money, then your interests are going to cross with the dominant power structure. And then you can say, hey, we need to have this. We need to eliminate food deserts in our communities. We need to have access to healthy, fresh vegetables for our children. We need to have a hospital in our community. We need to hire more teachers who look like us, who are qualified to teach our children. We need to have, versus just having our hand out begging. But if you have that money to make changes and to become more self-sufficient, now you have a stronger hand. If you look at the Muslim community in Hamtramck, Michigan, it's mainly a Yemeni community. They are self-contained in many ways. They have their own lawyers, their own dentists, their own grocery stores, their own restaurants, their own furniture stores. I went back home. I'm from Detroit. I went back to Detroit, and then I went to Hamtramck, which is the neighboring city, during election time. And all of the election posters were vote for Muhammad, vote for Ahmed, vote for Faisal, vote for Khalil. They also took over the city council. The Yemenis took over the city council. They make up the majority. I saw Yemeni police, Yemeni firefighters. They pushed the Polish community, who was the dominant group, they pushed them out. They took it over. Hamtramck, Michigan, look it up. That means it can be done, but you must have the proper focus. And in a society that is based on capitalism, it's based on economics, then you have to have that economic strength. You have to have that economic efficacy amongst yourselves as a community in order to move forward. Voting is not going to save you. Voting is not going to save your communities. We must save our own communities. And one of the key components of that is economics. We must learn financial literacy. Without financial literacy, you will continue to just run out and buy Jordans when they come out. You'll continue to run out and buy rims for your cars and buy things that depreciate the minute they put them in the box and you walk out the store. They don't gain value. We're not taught how to work the stock market. We're not taught, cryptocurrency and how it works. Is it a good investment? Is it a bad investment? We don't know about real estate and all of these types of things. And these are ways that the dominant group, this is how they generate wealth. We are not taught that. They teach their children that. Those who are more affluent, they pass that knowledge down to their children. But because we lack that knowledge as a collective, we rent instead of owning. We spend instead of saving. We are, again, a large component of the U.S. economy. So if we have a different focus in how we spend our money, and we become more disciplined and financially literate, then we become a force to be reckoned with within the country. Respect is earned, needs are met, and what we need for our success, we can get it. So hopefully this makes sense. Again, the whole point of this was interest convergence, and that many times the only way the powers that be capitulate to any degree or give up any of the resources that they have or anything of financial value is through the interest convergence. And many times there's something or benefit in it for them. What you get is not based on altruism. It's not just out of the goodness of their heart. There has to be a reason. You have that aspect of interest convergence. And then you have the other aspect, which is the example that I gave you with Malcolm and Martin. You have two different aspects of that interest convergence. One, I just explained, and the other with Martin and Malcolm. So hopefully this was beneficial. I guess if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section. Let me see. Make sure if you find benefit in this short talk that you pass it on to others. Like it, share it, subscribe, which I'm just recently starting to ask people to do that because I see other people do it on other videos. So I figured I might as well do it too. Must be something to it. Anyway, hopefully there's benefit to this. Everyone have a good night. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.